Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Jenn Bailey.
Thanks, Ray. This is the Ray Wenderlich podcast. Welcome to episode 10 for season 9. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 16th of July, 2019, for broadcast on the 21st of August, 2019. This episode is sponsored by Triple Byte. That's B-Y-T-E, Byte. I am Jenn Bailey, here with my Wizard of Code season 9 co-host, Dru Freeman.
I'm in so much trouble. This is because I used FaceApp to make myself look really old, and I look like Dumbledore. Thanks, Jen. On this episode, we have back on the show from season 7, Mark Dalrymple. Mark Dalrymple is still a longtime Unix and Mac programmer with over 25 years of professional experience. He's the principal author on Learn Objective-C on the Macintosh and Advanced Mac OS X Programming, the Big Nerd Ranch Guide. He's also one of the co-founders of Cocoa Heads, an international Mac and iOS programming community. He's currently working for the Big Nerd Ranch and is co-creator of MusicJot, music notation software for the iPad.
In this episode, Mark will discuss Combine. Then the second half, Dru will talk about Agile for one, spending 4.5 years developing software by himself. Mark, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be back.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Mark. We didn't get in too much trouble last time with our geek off for Christmas, but it's definitely good to have you back on the show.
Grab Inside Macintosh or not this time.
Yeah, it's fun. I've known Mark for a bunch of years. Probably, I even have an autographed copy of one of his old Big Nerd Ranch tomes. And it's always good to have you on the show. And today we're going to be talking about Combine.
Combine, yeah. So it's one of the big breakout technologies from WWDC this year. You know, the whole blowing people's minds. Mm-hmm. So you may realize that Apple's CarPlay was an absolute surprise success. You can find CarPlay in all sorts of vehicles, Hondas, VWs, etc. And because it's become so immensely popular, Apple has decided to adopt the same technology into the farming industry. So they introduced Combine, the ultimate in farm equipment interactive technology. Of course, from what I hear, developing for a Combine is kind of expensive because the simulator spans 4 screens. You need extra made for Combine hardware.
Mark?
And USB-C, yeah.
Mark?
Uh-huh.
Combine, a threshing machine for tractors.
Yes.
No. Did you make WWDC?
No, I couldn't get a magic ticket this year.
All right, because the technology is not Combine, it's Combine.
Oh, okay. So Apple introduced Combine this year.
Yes, this was a setup.
Yes, it's a setup. I did this for my Cocoa Heads presentation last week, and it went over about as well as that did.
So let's talk about Combine.
Yeah. So Combine is the proper way. And it's probably the most interesting thing to me that's happened at this year's WWDC, like for me, even over Swift UI, because I kind of like the plumbing, underwear, things below UI kit. But what Combine is, it's a big framework, so Combine is a great big framework for processing data as it changes over time. So your standard functional programming things like filter and map and reduce and those things can work over essentially a cluster of data that you have at hand. Combine lets you set up pipelines that you can run data through over time. So you can have a network request come in. You can have a chunk of code examine the HTTP result code. You can then take the data and decode it into a struct by using Codable. Then you can pass that on to something else that could pull out, say, a title, user's title, and put it in a user interface. And then somebody else in the pipeline could pick out another piece of data like their shoe size and generate shoes for them.
And it really just came down to 3 parts, right? The subscriber, give me the other 2 parts.
A publisher and operator.
Okay. And they're really, really small from what I've seen.
Yeah, looking at particularly the Combine in Practice WWDC session is the presenter builds up a fairly sophisticated pull something from the internet and do a whole bunch of stuff with it incrementally. And so by using a subscriber that, for instance, gets something from a web service, then the subscriber can pass its data onto an operator that can do stuff with it, which eventually ends up with the subscriber. So not even considering operators, you can have publishers and subscribers. Publishers provides data, and a subscriber consumes data. And then an operator is basically a subscriber and a publisher end to end, kind of like the push me pull you from Dr. Dolittle.
Mm.
And and Combine takes advantage of Swift's safety, so that you can only connect subscribers and consumers so long as two types correspond. A publisher has a particular type of data that it outputs, like a string or a particular structure, and a consumer has a particular type of data that can consume. Those have to match. And then there's a second channel for basically error messages. There's a failure type for, I'm a subscriber and I could fail in a number of ways, like no internet connection at all. So an error can go out of the publisher and then be handled by the subscriber. And also a publisher can say that I have no error channel. My error type is
Never.
Never. I want to think void, no, but it's never. Saying it's like, hey, you can assume that no errors will happen from me, which can be good and can be inconvenient.
And this allows you to pretty much bake whatever kind of error modeling system you want, as long as your two ends are compatible to deal with that.
That's right. And if they're not compatible, then you can make your own operator that could pass through the data and transform the error into a type you want.
So operators are basically in the middle transformers that'll transform those types if they don't match up.
Yes, they are robots in disguise.
Caught me off guard.
Sweet, I can almost never do that.
Yeah,
So kind of in the form of a stream. Can you set a breakpoint with that when you're troubleshooting it?
Yeah, because in the actual code, you can set things up as kind of a declarative pipeline. So URL session gets something and then .map to transform the data, then .decode and supply a closure to pull things out. So you can set breakpoints in there. And then there's also a breakpoint operator. So you can actually stick an operator in your pipeline, which is a breakpoint, which will trigger the debugger if one's running.
Now they also have a do catch operator. Is that correct?
Yes. So for things like there's operators like a filter, which can take incoming data and only emit a subset of it. If something throws inside of that, it will kill the pipeline. But you could do a try filter, in which case it will wrap the thing in a try block and emit a failure rather than killing the pipeline.
Now, one of the things that's been interesting this year in WWDC has been a lot of talking about these specific technologies, but almost talking about them in a box, where we've really focused on Combine's technologies, but not necessarily how to use that with, say, a Swift UI or how to use it with core data or any of those other technologies. Have you come across anything along those lines?
Yeah, that's been a kind of common comment by folks on Slack and at the last Cocoa Heads, is that some of the sample code which combines them, combines Combine and Swift UI, that's going to be an annoying name, I think, going down the line, when you need to combine stuff with stuff. But yeah, the sample code which shows hooking up Combine with Swift UI in a meaningful way has not come out yet. So it does seem like there was a little bit of siloing, or maybe they were so focused on we need to ship this by WWDC time that some of the touch points haven't gotten the love that they need. I kind of got the feeling that they've also kind of been waiting for the stuff to release it because there's been no ABI stability until recently. So
Right, it was the ABI stability in 5.0 and then the ABI modules in 5.1, and that basically means until then you can't ship your own frameworks without building it all into the OS.
Yeah, but I know they've been working on these things a long time. I don't know if it's trustworthy, but I saw a tweet that they've been working on this stuff like even before there was Swift.
Wow. Did you know Kotlin predates Swift? We learned that last time.
Actually, no, I didn't.
It was created before Swift, apparently.
But the 1.0 and the 1.0 and the introductions were pretty much neck and neck.
Yeah. So regarding Combine, when would it be? When is it appropriate to use Combine? Like for which projects? Is everyone going to move to this, or?
Well, in typical Apple fashion, you can only use the new toys on the latest and greatest operating system. So you can't use Apple's Combine and ship it on iOS 12. So if you wanted to ship an app before September, is that when it usually comes out? Then you're out of luck. If you want to support older users, then you'll need to implement things twice, one using Combine, once using some other more traditional existing mechanism. Or you can get, if you're really into that pattern, there's the various React toolkits that you can get. So you can do very similar things with those things and ship them on all the iOS platforms.
Have you had a chance to take a look under the hood to see what actually puts together these things like the publisher or the subscriber?
Yes, actually the first Combine session, I really like the approach they took, is that they showed the protocols, showed the publisher protocol, the subscriber protocol, and also the state machine of, I have a publisher, I have a subscriber, I connect them. The subscriber tells the publisher, hey, I'm here. The publisher says, okay, groovy, you're here. And then it can start sending it data. And then they show kind of the awkward way of hooking things up. And then, but we have these really cool generic function wrappers, which give us that dot map, dot breakpoint, dot filter, really nice syntax. So that first session breaks down kind of the more complex things. If you build a pipeline and you use Xcode's option click to show the signature, they get pretty crazy of generics nested inside of generics, nested inside of generics, enough so that they've provided a number of type erasure operators so that if you publish your own publishers, you don't have to expose all those details of, I have this 7-stage pipeline. It just says, hey, I'm any publisher, any subscriber that takes these types.
So now you said that they're basically protocols underneath the hood. So effectively, much like layers in Mac OS's AppKit, they've been able to back this into pretty much all of the rest of the frameworks.
Yes, I think that's the plan. They do currently have, I think, three touch points in the frameworks, one for timers, one for notification center, and one for URL session. And then other frameworks like that new virtual reality kit, the reality kit, I think that also has combined hooks, publishers and subscribers in it.
So
for Swift UI.
So effectively, then you can piecemeal it one step at a time using a timer and converting that into Combine, using a notification and converting that into Combine. But I think I remember you telling me that the notification center is not exactly that cleanly adopted.
Yes, mainly because the notification center has deep Objective-C roots, so it's very loosey-goosey in terms of type safety. The kind of the unit of currency for notifications is an info dictionary, which you can stick any keys and any values inside of that. So on the Swift side, you have to be careful about what you get out. So it's like getting something from like user defaults. You have to be a little bit careful of the types you get out, making sure that it is the correct type. Otherwise, mayhem ensues.
User infos are what, hashable : any?
Yes.
Which is pretty much like cutting the net out from underneath you anyway.
Right. So doing runtime type checks. Casey Liss has a blog post on kind of like why that's not his favorite pattern in Combine.
We'll, of course, add that along with everything else to the show notes. Now, I remember chatting with you offline, and you had mentioned that you saw some of the list of operators and you took on a project of your own.
Well, it was mainly just to kind of collect operators, kind of like for a talk I did on Swift attributes, is I just wanted to find out what all of them were. With Swift attributes, I could spelunk the compiler source code. With operators, that's a little bit harder. So I've got a list, probably, I can't count it right now, but several dozen operators. With some of them have really cool names like debounce and concatenate, drop until output, prefix while multicast. There's zip, try scan throttle, sync. So all sorts of kind of cool toys to play with.
Now, there's also a couple of, now I don't remember if they're the actual subscribers or if they're operators, but there's things such as just.
Yeah, just is a publisher. It's a way of injecting a particular value. So you could start a pipeline with just 5. And this thing is just a 5. I'm just going to inject this int into the next subscriber.
And there's a subscriber that's very similar that just takes anything and outputs it.
Sync.
So you can have a just sync, and that is the simplest subscriber publisher that you could have.
That's right. That's pretty much, I can't think of anything more, anything less complex than here is a hard-coded value. Okay, here is something that takes that value and runs a closure. And
so I guess that's a good way to also test operators, is that you can just simply start with things like just array and then see how the different steps along the way work.
Yes, and for unit testing also. So if you want to inject a particular value to start off a pipeline, so if you just wanted to test the guts of the pipeline without the all the networking stuff, instead of mocking out the network or coming up with some kind of replacement, you could have like the network pipeline, the network publisher, which is testable on its own. You could have the processing operators, and then you could do a just into the top of that and unit test just the processing without having to pull in networking.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Now, if I remember, the publisher themselves, I think there was something to the effect of they can have one, they can have a few, or they can have infinite.
Right. So a publisher can deliver 0 or more items. And so the publisher will also tell its subscribers when it has stopped, basically when it shuts down. So you could have a publisher that only emits 1 item, so it could emit 1 item and then say, okay, I'm done, calls a completion, and then you can wrap up. Or it can send as many, like it could be essentially infinite, like the notification, could be infinite, like the notification center, because those could keep on bubbling through for the entire life of the application. And sometimes nothing will show up. There could be, you do a network something, can't think of a good example right now, but or maybe a timer that you forgot to start, or a timer that goes off in an hour and your runtime was half an hour. So it's possible for a publisher to actually never actually do anything because the conditions don't happen.
Now, since it's publishers and there's the possibility of things coming through, I'm assuming they're also cancelable.
Yes. So they Apple gave themselves a little bit of weasel words. They say it's a best effort cancellation, because in general, cancellation, at least general cancellation, like thread cancellation, is really, really hard to do cleanly. If you set up the pipelines well, so there's not a whole lot of kind of like leftover state that, if you have to hide a value under a rock somewhere and pick it up later, if you don't clean up that stuff when you get torn down, you got memory leaks and you get race conditions and all sorts of terrible things can happen. But built into the protocols is a cancelable. So they actually now have a cancelable protocol that its only method is cancel. And so So anything that adopts that, you can go and call cancel on it. And I'm assuming that all of Apple's operators have at least some semblance of cancelability for them. So you can cancel the first, the last subscriber, kind of the one that you have in your hands, and then it'll kind of just back up. It'll kind of cancel. I'm canceling my publisher, and if it's an operator, that operator will go, I'm canceling my publisher. Oh yeah, I'm going to cancel my publisher all the way up to the top.
Is it a one-to-one on the publisher subscriber, or can there be multiple subscribers?
I want to think it's one-to-one with the protocols, but there are things like like multicast, I think, is one of them, where you could hook up multiple subscribers. So essentially it's kind of like a mux demux. So you could have a single stream of stuff and then it goes into a splitter and it splits it off into multiple pipelines. And pipeline is a great mental model that I'm using for this. I actually picked that up from a nice article from Joseph Heck, calling these combined publisher subscriber operator things pipelines, kind of after the old Unix pipeline. But you have this pipeline that goes essentially into a splitter, and each of the things that's being split can be its own pipeline. And then there's a couple of basically, Combinator has other implications, but same kind of thing. It's a way of combining multiple streams into one, essentially rendezvous points, which is nice for user interface stuff. So Swift UI had one of the sessions had a Swift UI where there were multiple, essentially, paths feeding into one multi-headed operator, and only when everything coming into that had a true value did it actually enable the login button, for instance.
Oh, okay. So things like you have a valid username, you have passwords that are valid.
Right. But it could also be ways of, if you've got a lot of different kinds of work, it could be a way of fanning out that work into multiple pipelines, and presumably they could fanning out into multiple pipelines, and you can control like which run loop or which dispatch queue they run on. So you could have these operators running on different queues, doing work in a multi-threaded but isolated manner, so reducing the chance of race conditions, and then all ending up at a rendezvous point. And then once everybody shows up, then that final pipeline that final operator, subscriber, whatever, can then handle whatever was created by the more complex setup.
Hopefully there's an operator in your list that says pop it to the main queue so I can do UI stuff.
Actually, there is. I'm trying to remember the name of it.
It's a big list.
Right.
Well, he said several dozen, so.
Right, and if you want, I can stick my really brief Cocoa Heads presentation up as well, or you can steal that from the. Finding it, there's a
pause while he looks.
Yeah. To answer your question earlier, Drew, or not really answer it, but to add to it, the rules of subscription: a subscriber can only have one subscription. 0 or more values can be published. At most, one completion will be called. So that's off a blog post I was referencing.
Multiple coupling, okay. And we'll put that post into the show notes as well, because we like giving you all the information we can.
Yeah, I'm not finding it, but it's something like receive on or handle on. But it's like, hey, I need this thing on the main queue, so it's just stick another operator in there, and that's all it does.
Just pops the current stream onto the current onto the main queue, and it's safe for UI.
Yes.
Have you gotten to do much experimenting with it?
I have not. Just kind of demands of time, and I'm still kind of frightened of installing Catalina on any of my machine.
Me too.
And my burner machine finally got dropped from the OS beta train, so I can't use burner.
Well, he did say 25 years, so he does have a couple of 6200s that he's running.
I was cleaning my bookshelf. I still have I think it's an 800 megahertz titanium Mac PowerBook over there.
Obvious question then is, are you going to be picking up the cheese grater?
I am not. I don't need that kind of power. I am very happy on this 8 gigabyte or 16 gigabyte laptop is what I've been doing my work on for decades now. So, but I don't run big Docker containers or do 3D modeling or run huge, gigantic apps that sprawl over the universe. So my work is fairly constrained, and I can't think of anything else.
Well, let me ask you this then, because I know you've been working on MusicJot for a couple of months, maybe 80 or 100.
84 months at least.
Do you see Combine having places in there that it might actually streamline anything, or is it still too amorphously black box to get a good feel?
For MusicJot, probably not. So MusicJot is a music notation program that you can use your finger or stylus to put in notes. You can handwrite stuff, print, playback MIDI, export music XML, all sorts of stuff. And its hard parts are basically the data model and undo, is making undo solid. And that's just kind of a big ball of mud. But I've got another project with another group I work with that specializes in indoor cycling and spinning apps. We have an app called Ride Buddy, which is basically a heart rate monitor app that can record heart zones and give you data in real time. And it's needing a rewrite. And so it's like, oh, I could have a publisher that is the heart rate monitor, another publisher that is like a bicycle sensor for RPM or for power or something. And then there's all these user interface elements like a bucket that fills up based on a heart zone of how much time you spend in zone 1 or zone 2. And those could be subscribers to this stream of heart rates that come in, and then have operators in the middle which are doing the math of accumulating time in zone or average power per lap. And so it's kind of like, yeah, that could be a whole lot of fun.
Sounds like it actually really will fit in there quite nicely.
Yeah, it sounds perfect. And also I need to redo the UI because it's like iOS 4. 4 is when it was birthed. So it's got some old stuff in it, and I kind of want to get a clean slate with it. So since it's not something that we make for money, that's like as a hobby project, which might actually ship, that may be what I do probably in the fall, because I got a bunch to do this summer.
Now, you said you haven't actually had the bravery to install Catalina, so I'm assuming you haven't touched Swift UI yet.
I have not.
Yeah, I jumped up and down in the puddle of Swift UI, and I got my cuffs kind of wet. But I tried taking some of the UI of my app and seeing if I could spin it up in the new magical UI system, and that was a bit much. But I think I'm going to save that for the second half, because coming up next, I'm going to talk about what it's like to spend 4.5 years solo as a developer, trying to treat myself as a team, sort of call it Agile for one. And we'll do that right after a message from our sponsors, TripleByte. We'll be back in a few. This RayWenderlich.com podcast is brought to you by TripleByte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume. You spend hours and hours on phone screens, take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your interest or your cover letters. Well, if you're a software engineer, TripleByte can help.
They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you get to go straight to the final interviews with the companies on their platform. It's like the common app for software engineers. TripleByte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code.
And I can appreciate that. Being in the industry for 35 years, I'm entirely self-taught. My undergraduate study was in theater, and I left school to do my first job, so I don't carry a bachelor's, no bachelor's of arts, no bachelor's of science, and that's the one thing I'm often trying to hide or misdirect on my resume. With TripleByte, they'd care more about the coding experience that I have and not worry about that one little fact.
Apply now at triplebyte.com/Ray. That's triplebyte.com, byte, BYTE, as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through TripleByte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus. Thanks once again to our sponsor, TripleByte. That's Byte, B-Y-T-E. And now we're back for our second half, where Dru is going to tell us about his experience as a one-man Agile team.
Yeah, this app finally got released about a week ago, and it was about 4.5 years from the day I put down the first line of code. And I have to preface this with the fact that this is my first major app on an app store for myself. I have been in the industry for years and years, and I have been part of many published pieces of software. I worked on Office. I've worked at the Norton folks. So I've published software. I've usually been the go-to guy to make sure the software gets published and gets pushed out to the store. But about 4.5 years ago, I took on a project, and I wasn't even taking on a project. It was how I decided to teach myself Swift. So of course, that means that some of the code, well, let's just skip over what some of the code looks like. I recently was looking at it and I found semicolons. And for those of you who understand Swift, you can understand exactly how out of place that went. Initially, it was just trying to complete a couple of little projects all together. One of which was I wanted to make a complication for the watch. I wanted to have something that could get the time of day when you went to the watch. Now that sounds kind of bizarre because you figure, well, that's what the watch does. But I wanted to be able to tell you where the sun and the moon were in the sky, as the sun is currently in, where is the sun currently? I think it's currently in Cancer. For those of you who are at home going, oh my God, I'm a Libra, but it's different. So I wanted something that you'd be able to look at the watch and see where is the sun and the moon, and click on your watch and make a journal entry. I'm proud to report after 4.5 years, you can't click on the watch and make a journal entry. That part has still not been finished. But what happened was I wound up figuring I needed a whole bunch of other features that fit into some work that I did, and I built a utility that had roughly 6 sections. Now, it's easy to look back on it and say it now as I built a utility that has 6 sections, but I discovered that you need discipline to write an app for yourself. And I used a lot of the experience from working with major teams at many companies, or many teams at major companies and a couple of minor companies. And I started using a lot of the Agile practices, which sounds really bizarre because I was an Agile team of 1.
Yeah, how did that work?
Initially, very badly. Agile really has a couple of requirements that I just had to wave off right off the bat, which was the stand-ups. Though I found up later on that it made sense for me to actually do what I refer to as a daily sanity check, saying, okay, where am I? What am I doing? What stage am I in? I started doing 2 to 4 week sprints. And the reason the number of weeks would separate would depend on, well, my real world. If I'm working for a company, I can't necessarily dedicate 2 weeks of work. I would have to say, well, I'm going to get 2 weeks of work done over 4 weeks. Or in the case of when we got close, I like using we because it makes me feel like there was a team behind me. When I would get down to
The voices in your head.
It's like the royal we.
the royal we and the royal we and the royal voices in the head, we don't talk about them very much. But sometimes the voices in the head make me say, I'm going to have a 12-week sprint, go away. And I'll admit, this app did get put down for about a year at one point, but it's a free app. It has in-app purchases, and I'm pleased to say that after 5 days, I've had just about every one of the in-app purchases bought, so that's a good sign. That makes me happy. I've gotten a good number of units out there. But I want to get back to the idea of sprints by myself. because the idea really came down to if I could break things down into stories and epics and tasks and say, okay, these are my 1.0 UX epic stories and tasks, or these are my build process things. And I actually have a series of about 14 issues per sprint that are build only. They're things like open the sprint, now schedule the next sprint, do do a branch on the main develop so that I have a branch for this build. And those things keep me effectively being able to put on a PM hat while I'm being a developer. They make me stay focused to say, well, I need to have time to do these other things. I need to make sure that I'm unit testing sufficiently for where I'm putting in code. And all these practices that as a sole developer, we tend to miss because it's like, well, I'm just going to focus on the code. If I focus on the code, that's fine. And I get through that piece of code, then I move on to the next piece of code. You're missing things like essential documentation. You're missing things like tracking what you've changed and done. Because on the App Store, let me tell you, I despise it when the new update of a large video viewing app or a large social networking face-like app say, we update this app every 2 weeks. It's like, that's great. What did you fix? Are my bugs fixed? Because as we often say, a new version has come out, and that means there are new bugs to match the old bugs they didn't fix. We love our IDEs.
I love UX code. I've got a question. So it sounds like you've got some kind of tool where you've got your stories laid out and you do them week to week. What tool do you use?
I am using Jira. I have become a slave to Atlassian. I am 100% Atlassian's doormat because I use Jira. I actually have a flow and swim lanes. I will move issues from open to in process to finished to closed, specifically so that I can track them. And with Atlassian's Jira, I can also say, with Jira, I can also mark revisions. So I have build 63 or build 65, and I can say, okay, so what issues were attached to build 65? And that way, when I'm talking to developers or I'm talking to testers or I'm posting things onto the App Store, I can say, this is specifically what got fixed. Because I think I owe it to my users to say, hey, there was a crash. You may not have even thought there was a crash, but you had a crash and didn't realize it. And now you can see, hey, if you did something like this, we looked into it. We fixed it. Admittedly, this was the 101 build that I just released today. And one of the fixes is removed extraneous pieces of UX, which means things that aren't quite finished yet, I hid.
So do you
So-
do like
go ahead.
calculate? Okay, this is
Sorry.
what exponential back office is for. Do you use tools like velocity? Do you estimate your stories on a point level?
I picked something up from one of the companies I worked with to use story points based on the Fibonacci scale. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And then you basically approximate how much you feel that story will take time-wise and effort-wise. For me, a 1, 2, or 3 is somewhere in the vicinity of 10 minutes to an hour. A 3, a 5, and an 8 are anywhere from an hour to 6 hours. Once I get to something that's going to be a day or two, that's when I'm in my 8, 13s. Usually if a story is going to be 13, then it is that giant warning sign. Maybe you need to break this into smaller chunks. Because the other goal is at any point, I should be able to say, you know what, I want to ship a version. And that's one of the things about Agile that I like is that, yes, you'll break off into a branch to work things. But by working your development in a branch, you can always say it's a shippable version. And the branch doesn't come in until the story is complete.
Do you have any like local continuous integration tools, build server kind of stuff?
At this point, it's not complex enough that I've needed that. I'm running my own unit tests, and pretty much my unit tests have all been passing. And when I write a new section, I write a few new unit tests, and I run it. I have a few scripts in there for versioning, but I haven't put it together yet. I've done Jenkins so many times that I don't want to. And
Just make the pain stop.
it does. I've tried using the Xcode the Xcode robots, and I'm just not happy because you just don't see enough information. So fortunately, this app by itself is not complicated enough that I've needed continuous integration. Xcode's also really done a good job of cleaning up certificates and the upload process to the App Store. The one thing that I would actually need the most help with continuous integration on is updating stuff on App Store Connect, and that's stuff that isn't API-able.
So what about the developer who was self-taught and never got to be in a team, or like some of these people that are aspiring to be developers? How could they better their process when, like myself, I worked inside of a smaller team that we probably did Agile-like things, but there was no formal process. So how could...
That's really, and it's hard too, because I've been asked on interviews so many times, do you know Agile? And my first response is always, well, how do you define Agile? And that response has, I think, helped me in a lot of interviews, because Agile is one of those things, like many other programming manifesto techniques, that has certain practices that are common and certain practices that sort of get bent along the way by whichever team you're on. Scrums are handled differently, even though theoretically scrums are really handled one way. Stand-up meetings, it's how your stories are put together. The thing is that the best thing you can do is you can read up on Agile and see how it works. But then again, what I did was I took what I knew from Agile and said, okay, what if I have to do all the jobs? Because when you're a lone developer, you're wearing all the hats anyway. You are your own marketing team, and let's be honest, most developers are not marketers. I will say that one of the hardest things that I've had since pushing the app out there is figuring out, well, who do I tell without seeming obnoxious? And I've even asked myself, do I want to go on Twitter and pay to have my tweet pushed out more? Now, that wonderful thing that as a developer, I'm like, why do people do this? It's obnoxious. And now I'm sitting here having to put on that hat and say, I'm going to have to do this.
Maybe you could make multiple Twitter profiles and you could hire somebody.
There are actually companies that do that. Twitter farms, I believe is the term.
You could make a marketing persona, and then it's not you. And if anyone complains about it, you could say, oh, it's my marketing person.
You know, a long time ago, there was a show called Bullwinkle and Friends.
I love that show.
It was created by a man named Jay Ward, so much so that all the characters have the middle initial J. And I remember very clearly at the end of the credits once, it said, executive producer, Pisoini Britt. And then the letters would all fall out. And somebody asked Jay Ward exactly what that was, and he says, you know, my name is all over this enough. I didn't need to put my name on it yet again, so I just put up some gibberish and let it all get fired away. I mean, I see myself having a web page where it's like CEO, Drew Freeman, CTO, Drew Freeman, CMO, Drew Freeman. And knowing how much money we've gotten off the app so far, there's no reason that I should have any COs at this point.
Yeah, you should see the credits for the cartoon Godzilla versus Bambi. It's
yes, Marv Newland?
I don't remember the name.
I think it's Marv Newland.
That sounds like a great cartoon.
Yeah, because I think one of the credits after he says like written by Marv Newland, directed by Marv Newland, or animated by Marv Newland by Mr. and Mrs. Newland.
Yes.
That was funny.
So as the app developed, it was obvious that the organization helped. I've looked at I'm of course using Bitbucket because, well, if I'm already Atlassian's poster child, I may as well go whole hog. Bitbucket stores my Git repository. I've looked at the punch card history, which is seeing how check-ins went. And I noticed that over time, the more I adopted Jira, the more the check-ins became more regular. It got to the point where I could even say, these are the nights that I don't typically code, and these are the hours that I don't typically code. And, oh, look, I do get sleep.
But wait, I thought 10x programmers don't sleep.
You thought which programmers don't sleep?
10x. There's a Twitter exploded the last couple of days with somebody posting a list of 10x programmers, use a black background and they don't bathe, and it was this list of very kind of like stereotypical nerd who never washes and sleeps under a desk kind of thing as the ideal to aspire to.
I have been working on this project pretty much consistently over the past 6 months from home. And working from home, I needed that discipline to tell me to get up, to have food, to interact with my family, to stop programming and edit podcasts together on occasion.
So you didn't use the flat food diet? We call the flat food diet anything that can be slid under the door?
Along with feature requests and food, slide it under the door. Listen, that's not caveman programming. If I remember correctly, caveman programming is just putting prints in for debug.
That's right.
That's what I do. That's some of my, I like that. I'm glad there's a name for that.
But I have gone out of my way to find organizational pieces of software that make it easier to account for my time. I've got one that actually measures what app I'm using at what time on my system, so I can see, was I productive? Was I goofing around? Was I in a web browser? It's a really great piece of software. I'll put it into the show notes. Trying to remember the name of it off the top of my head. Pause while I look it up.
I use one like that as well called Rescue Time, and it will measure what apps you use, what websites you're on, and it'll tell me when I've met so many hours of working in a day, which is great.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about the one that tells you the websites, because the ones that I've seen is just like Safari, and like if all that time has been inside of Apple's Docs, cool. If it's all been on Reddit and Facebook, then I should have better control of my life.
Rescue Time will do that. I am so into productivity apps. I've tried just dozens of them, and I'm really interested to hear what are the good ones for this one-person team, Agile, because I haven't explored a lot of those. But Rescue Time will audit your time on every device and tell you where you've been, and you can filter it. You can even lock yourself off the internet. So if I had to lock myself off Facebook or something, you can put a filter for that.
It's a product from SetApp, which is sort of a mini app store for the Mac, and it's called the timing menu item. And the timing menu item will show me how much time I've been using on the system, and it'll let me then do a complete analysis of what I did, and I can set up projects, I can set up categories, and then I can basically say, okay, I was in this app. The thing is that it actually uses accessibility to monitor the windows, so it can see on Safari what the title bar is on a web page that you're looking at. You have to trust this app if you're going to use it, because it really does open it up. But as a result, it can tell me that I was using these web pages, and when I'm doing editing, for example, I need to be able to tell it that if I'm on the Ray Wenderlich pages, I'm doing podcast work. If I'm looking at the documentation.apple pages, I'm doing development work. If I'm looking at some social network, I'm wasting time. And then it tells me at the end of the day how productive I was, because I can set percentages of productivity based on that.
That sounds really good.
I really like the app. It's a very complex, but it's I like the app. I tend to ignore it from time to time, but that's specifically because, you know, I've got it pretty much tuned to how I like it, and it's rare to have that one app that you've actually tuned.
That is true. I tend to let that lag. Do you have a preferred to-do list?
You know, sometimes I will just simply use the reminders app on the Mac or on the iDevices, but that's just because the Apple Cloud keeps it all together. But I will often use Google Calendar to even set things like lunch reminders.
Oh, nice. Yes, I like that. I use Habitica for a to-do list, and that has helped me so much because I don't know about any other developers, but I struggle sometimes with procrastination or motivation, especially with like boring tasks or just getting started. So that task is like a role-playing game, and you can have friends and be in a little party, and it's got missions you go on.
Yeah, I've kind of gone old school. I use Google Calendar for my calendaring, and then, you know, bullet journal, notebook, very nice pen.
Ooh, nice.
So and get the nice tactile feeling of, you know, writing things down, and then when I'm migrating a task, like I migrated a task like for 3 days, it's like, why am I procrastinating on this, or is this something that I really need to do?
Yeah, my girlfriend made me a journal for my birthday. She's she got me the dot light graph paper, which makes me very happy because I use that a lot.
I wondered what
dot
the
grid
dot
paper is.
journals are for. Yeah, what do you use the dot grid? How is it different?
Well, first of all, instead of just having lines, if I'm actually trying to do some kind of sketches, I have a better environment to sketch in, because a lot of my notes are either going to be code or they're going to be UX notations. And sometimes I'll just want to sketch something in UX and I'll need to have some sense. I can't draw a straight line to save my own life. So this way I can actually have straight lines that go in different directions.
Wow, you've sold me.
Yeah, the dot grid is a very subtle just dot pattern. Usually it's a 5mm pitch. So you can use it as a baseline for handwriting, and you can just kind of, you know, unfocus a little bit and you don't notice it, and use it for freehand.
Yeah.
So it's like graph paper but not in your face, and lined paper but not in your face.
Wow. I saw those for sale, and now I'm going to have to pick one up and try it.
Oh, yes, they work marvelously. I will ask you later in the season how you feel about those.
All right, I will have to go buy some. My daughter and I joke because we buy journals almost every time we go shopping, and we joke like, "Oh, I think I need another journal," because we have like a shelf full of them. But I write in them a lot.
But I will say that using Jira and having a hand notebook or two, it's essential, because, you know, I find myself realizing issues, bugs, new stories, new changes, new ideas all the time. And having Jira for the iPad lets me immediately add an issue in and track it, and then later come back and say, well, it's in the backlog. Where do I want to fix it? You know, I've just put 101 out. I've got a laundry list a mile long for 1.1. Except, of course, the number one requested feature right now for my app is, why didn't you release it for Android?
So is Jira, does it have a lot of competitors, or is it cross-platform? What is the most industry standard for the aspiring developer? Because like maybe you'd want to teach yourself, like maybe someday I'll work on an Agile team. So what are some skills that person should get? Would Jira be a
Jira's not, I'm trying to remember if Jira's, I know Atlassian has a base fee, and it's not that expensive if you're a small team. You know, it's under $10 a month, I believe, for what I'm paying for to get Bitbucket and Jira together. And that alone is more than worth it for me to have an organizational system. I mean, for people who will pay for a large productivity package or graphic package, this is a drop in the bucket for development. Learning about it is fairly straightforward. There are just tons and tons of videos. There are tons and tons of articles on Agile. Most of them will probably conflict with each other. So, pick and choose what makes the most sense.
Right. And then there's also a thing called a pivotal tracker, which I've used on some projects. It's a Jira Lite without any customizations. So it has a very well-defined kind of workflow, but you can write tickets and stack them and estimate them. And so that could be like a good gateway drug for it, because it's very simple. And graduate to Jira when you outgrow it.
Yeah, a thing to realize is that Jira is really an issue tracking It's an issue tracking website. So first of all, it works on anything that runs a web browser. I mean, I can use an iPhone for Jira, but it's an issue tracker, not a product/project tracker. It's not going to necessarily do the bigger picture. Now there are plenty of apps for that as well. I really do recommend the Set App bundle. Set App is a subscription service that basically says, here's about 50 or so apps that do everything from little pixel art to tracking to JSON editing. And you basically can have any app that's in there. It's sort of the way that Apple's planning on running the arcade come the fall.
Wow. Very affordable solution. It looks like only $9.99 for all the stuff you get.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah,
I'm so into productivity apps because I really struggle to keep organized. I have 2 jobs and 4 pets and single mom, so I really got to stay on the ball.
Yeah, Setup has, I think it's about 40 or 45 apps, maybe more, that's in their library. Let me see, all apps. I'd say it's about 40 apps, but it's everything from lifestyle, creativity, productivity. It's got a productivity timer. I believe the timer that I spoke of is also part of that. It's a timing app. It's got an unclutter. It's got a mail organizer. It's got maintenance apps, including Clean My Mac, which is really wonderful.
Nice.
So yeah, Set App and putting a simple Atlassian license together is paramount. If my app pays off my Atlassian, I think I'll sit back and go, I win.
That is
because we've already made hundreds of thousands of dollars in the past 5 days.
Oh gosh, you never know. It could take off. You could be the next Flappy Birds or
Flappy Utility. No, it just.
Do you do any code sprints? Because you don't have anyone to compete against.
I'm not racing with this. I'm trying to make sure that I am putting the right amount of code time in, and even now all of my estimates have been long. I've been actually getting on my own case about making sure that my estimates aren't too long. Again, it's that multiple voices, the multiple hats. I've noticed from when I check these things in, it's like, well, I said it was going to be 20 minutes and it only took 5 minutes, and that's across the board. Trying to make sure that I make those times more accurate from sprint to sprint. The interesting thing again is that in fixing some bugs, I had a crasher pop up in my 1.0 that looked like it went into some of my oldest code. We've talked a lot this season about coding style and being able to work with the programmers from 6 months ago, which may be you, and in this case are always me. And I've realized that I have to start adding technical debt of going back and cleaning up a lot of the older code. At the base of this thing is a bunch of a C library that I actually ported from NetC to MacC, which is a bit of a nightmare, and I probably did wrong and is probably not 64-bit safe, though it's 64-bit. We'll find out at some point. It's just computing astronomical distances. How much could that require 32-bit accuracy?
What are your most what are the most valuable lessons you've learned over time?
That's a fantastic question. One is I have definitely learned that if I don't keep this organized, it's not getting done. That I can look at its history and see periods of time that were due to complete lack of organization. At the same time, I can also see places where I was ramping up my organization and I ramped up too far. I over-managed. And it's amazing to think of the fact that I could manage myself, project manage myself, and micromanage myself at the same time.
Oh,
And let me
gosh.
tell you, I didn't like it one bit.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Did you quit on yourself? Did you ever write yourself a letter of resignation?
I actually put the app down for about a year.
Oh,
So
oh.
one could say, yes, I walked away from it. Fortunately,
You took a sabbatical.
I took a sabbatical. Unfortunately, I rehired myself. So let me turn it around. Let me ask you, what experience have you folks had working on your own apps, without anybody else contributing to it?
Well, you guys can laugh at me because I worked for a small company. That's the experience I had. And then I moved into teaching. So I'm a real amateur when it comes to this stuff. And I've used Bitbucket and Git, and I've gotten better at it. But I have killed my own code 3 or 4 times with Bitbucket and Git, like irreparably, just doing it wrong.
Oh, killing your own code is all part of it. I mean,
it's just blown away all my changes for like the last month. And so I've definitely had to fire myself multiple times. And I started making a copy of my directory, like as just compressing the folder, my project folder, to a zip file and putting a date stamp on there before I ever start messing with command line repo management, just as a habit. So that was a lesson learned for me. Like before I get into, committing changes and shifting around branches, I'll just make a physical hard copy. And I feel silly, and I've gotten a lot better at it. But in the learning process, I blew away my own code at least 3 or 4 times, and it was devastating.
Mark, have you worked on any solo projects?
Not in a long time. So my indoor cycling app stuff, I've been working on that since 2010. Music Jot has been in flight for 7 years. So with 2 side projects, there's not a whole lot of time left over for just me stuff. So my own stuff tends to be like really, really small one-offs, little utilities or demo programs for a class or something. So pretty much it's been teams of 2 for the side projects and bigger for actual paying work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the paying work that keeps us going, and the paying work it's interesting that the paying work is not usually solo, but I have worked in my share of companies where I was the iOS developer, small companies, to the Android developer who was also there. And I think that may be some of where I began to learn how to manage it myself, because while I wasn't managing myself, I was on a team where my work wasn't necessarily compatible with the other team's work. They'd be working on one feature, I'd be working on a different feature, but we would both simply be one card on the Scrum wall.
And I've got enough time-consuming things outside of coding which soak up my time that I just don't have like evening after evening free to just kind of sit down and do my own stuff.
Yeah, we had James Dempsey on earlier this season. I found out that you're a conditional breakpoint.
Yes, I am.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, so whenever I'm co-located with James, actually the last couple of times, like for Swift by Midwest, he got a trombone for me. He rented a trombone so that I could do the solo part in Modelin' Man.
Nice.
Oh, That's so cool.
ago. He had me and Jim Dalrymple trading Model and Man solos a couple of times in the great big performance, which was
Battling Dalrymples, no relation.
Yeah, no relation, but that was a huge amount of fun. So I play in a couple community bands, community orchestras. Actually, I met my wife in a community orchestra. So pretty much the computer thing pays for the music habit.
Yep.
That's one thing. My daughter gets older, I'm getting more and more free time. So it's been, so I'm trying to instill a habit of practice. So thank goodness for all these little tasks with Ray Wenderlich, and it's been motivating me to code every single day, because back with teaching, I didn't have to. To teach the basics, I could just brush up on the basics and just teach that. But I would like to actually be good at code at a more intermediate advanced level. And I've got a long climb, as you can tell, but I figure an hour a day. So I'm trying to get that self-discipline. So now that I have a 17-year-old, I might have some time.
So it seems that there's a lot that one can use for organizational tools for themselves and actually make progress on their own to work on their own projects in an organized manner. It's not a redundant, but it actually sort of followed through. Also, I want to thank you, Mark, for being on the show tonight. It was a lot of really great information, not just about Combine, but about combines as well.
Well, my wife did grow up on a farm, so I know stuff.
I love the 4 screens. That's got to be good. But Mark, thank you for being on the show yet again. It's always a pleasure to have you join us.
Oh, I had so much fun just hanging out and chatting with you two.
But that's going to wrap things up for this 10th episode of the Ray Wenderlich podcast. We'll be back again in 2 weeks after this show with Eric Hellman.
Oh, Eric Hellman writes software mostly for Android. He drinks more coffee than you do and can talk about it for hours.
The coffee or the software?
Probably both. And he's a Google developer expert with a passion for teaching.
Aha. So it looks like that's going to be in your wheelhouse on the next show.
Yeah, sounds like he'll have some in common with me and Shuki Chan.
But that will wrap things up for this episode of the Ray Wenderlich podcast. We thank again Triple Byte, that's Byte, B-Y-T-E, for sponsoring this episode. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.